are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Just after midnight on the East Coast. Hour number 3 coming your way, commercial-free, interruption-free. We have Andy Bishago on with us for the duration of the hour. We can really get in-depth into the information. Now, Andrew, is there any new information that you can disclose once again for the first time here on this broadcast?
There is, but I have to kind of take a rain check on it because I have to find out from you or from William Whitecrow what he shared with you in the first hour. But let me just say that there may be an incipient disclosure involving he and I. He and I go back to 1971. So that'll be up to William. But
let's bring William on with us. I think he's been listening along, and if you don't mind, Andy, maybe we can make this roundtable.
I would welcome it.
Okay, excellent. Paging Mr. Whitecrow. Mr. Whitecrow.
In 1971-72, I was provided martial arts training. It was basically a mix of Aikido and karate, mostly defensive in nature, to protect myself physically when I was time traveling. That martial arts instruction, as was developed in a recent face-to-face meeting between William Whitecrow and I in Northern California, where he lives, actually at his residence, was validated. In other words, we established that he was my martial arts instructor. And it's funny, I was recounting to him an incident that occurred in 2011, 40 years after he provided me that training. I was at a friend's house and therefore not sleeping in my own bed. And my host came running into my bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I flew off the mattress in a kind of a scissor jump and landed in the middle of the room in what's called a dragon drop. Basically, it's a defensive karate position. So I described that for William, and he said, well, there's the body memory, but that kind of shows you what a brilliant instructor I was, because 40 years later, you're doing a dragon drop off of a bed while you're laying on your back because somebody has run into your bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is actually what happened. The person actually ran into the room to tell me something, and I thought I was under attack, so I did the famous scissor buckle jump off of a mattress, is where you slam one of your legs down and you go off the mattress with the other leg. And I flew across the room like Jackie Chan. And we were laughing because William had been my instructor in Project Pegasus, but it gets more interesting. I then encountered William again on Mars. He was one of the Army guards who was protecting us on Mars. And when I was visiting him, about a half year ago at his home in Northern Cal, we were called that we were standing next to a kind of a Quonset hut on Mars, and he was describing how another team had been interdicted by these pterodactyl-like predators, and there was a real threat to some of our people's survival on the surface. And so we wandered over to their location in the company of William Stillings, but we had only 2 AR-15s. Which are basically the burp guns that we were going to need to knock these pterodactyl-like predators out of the sky if they attacked us, and they did. William and I are not just Facebook friends. We're former colleagues who stood back to back and protected ourselves and Brett, while about 20 pterodactyl-like predators were actually dive bombing us. And William threw me the AR-15, the second, the extra AR-15 that he had. And he said, let's go back to back. When they're within 15 feet, get a line on them, get a bead on them, and then fire at 5 feet. So William and I saved each other's lives and Brett's life many years ago, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, by basically 1982, 83 time frame, by standing back to back, knocking pterodactyls out of the sky as they were dive bombing us on Mars, and we're not making it up. So I'm now bringing William Whitecrow forward as a 5th Mars whistleblower, a 5th Mars jump room whistleblower.
Wow. Andy, William married Cherie and I.
Yeah.
We've been, very tied in with William since the very beginning of Truth Frequency.
Yeah.
I had absolutely no idea. He never said a word about any of this.
And the funny thing is, I recognized him last year. I guess it was around August of 2015. He just gave me the privilege of hosting me. We had a wonderful discussion out in his garden at his home in Northern Cal. And when I encountered him on Mars, I didn't recognize him as Bill, my martial arts instructor from Pegasus. And I was only able to put those two things together in 2015, and now we're bringing it forward publicly after I asked William to come forward to, among other things, help my presidential campaign, because somebody of William's dedicated and distinguished service on behalf of the United States Army goes a long way to establish that I'm telling the truth about the development of time travel and Project Pegasus, and then the covert history of Mars exploration that was undertaken by a very young and brave generation of Americans 30, 35 years ago. And William was one of the people who I'm very grateful for, because he was keeping us alive on the surface.
That is absolutely amazing. William, this is, the first time we're discussing any of this, and I think the first time that you've discussed any of this in public. What was the recruitment like?
Very simple. With some people, a lot of people will look at payment, but once you understand the long-term implications and what's really going on, you do it because it needs to be done. I know that sounds crazy and may sound military-minded to a point, but that's where you're at the time when you're dealing with things at this level. And that's how come I always told you guys and other people there's more to the story about what's really going on Earth and everything else, and the recruitment was they wanted the good people, but they wanted the people that would think, not just follow crazy orders. Okay, this is your team, this is what you go do, and this is how you do it. And once somebody's put under your care, nothing's going to touch them.
Let me stop you for just a moment, because this is very, very important information that we're going over. Do you have the stream playing in the background, or the speakers on, or anything like that? Because we're still getting a little bit of a loop. It's not as bad as it was before.
No, I don't. Let me see here. Oh, yes, the stream is on. I'm sorry.
Okay, excellent. So please, okay, excellent. Please continue.
Okay, it's just that, there's many different, everything is compartmentalized. Andrew is an individual, and Obama, and there's a lot of people of history that have gone to, how do you think people get to where they are? Everybody thinks and turns around and goes, okay, well, everybody's put there. Now you understand a bigger picture, aspect of the picture here. Andrew, myself, and actually many other people, and hopefully more will come forward as time goes on, have dealt with experiences that most people, even in their lives, don't know about. When Andrew came here the first time and talked to me on my compound here, and it's a fenced-in compound, that's it, period. And then I told my wife right after he left, mentioned the name Karen and, things of this nature, and she got tears in her eyes and started to cry. So let that be an example of what he's talking about, the truth of it. What's going to make a person do that? My wife knew about it. That was it. But she understands the implications of what this meant, because I haven't talked in many years to anybody about this kind of stuff. But this is what's really going on out there. That's why when you mentioned earlier in the show, when I was on before this one, I said, if you people out there want to know the truth, the question is, can you handle it? But the training was intense, hand-to-hand, a lot of it. You had to understand how to deal with things on the fly, like handing Andrew the weapon, saying, come on, this is it, back to back, giving him the distance to fire because of the thickness of skins and just different things that you have to think of instantaneously. And that's the kind of people they want that can think on their own, can move quick, but will still follow orders to a T. But you improvise a lot, and it keeps you alive.
And so what were your ages at the time? I take it you're a little bit older than Andrew?
Yeah, a little bit. The thing, it was during the military, time that I was in the military, and actually before, there's a lot of things that most of these people you have to understand are picked as children. And that's what really got me with Andrew the first time I listened to him. And I knew there was there's something about his voice and everything and what he talked about before we even met, this time. And it wasn't just a familiarity, it was what he was saying, and knew is true. You know those things you talk about knowing without knowing? This is one of them things. And why do you know that? Because you have covered memories of things that are going on. And once things start happening, the reality starts coming to the surface, and all of a sudden the synchronicities start happening, and you start meeting one another, and things go on. There were other projects involved besides him and everything, but to be part of a program where you were guarding presidents, future presidents, and things like this, can you say no?
Right. So
I think that, Chris, just to estimate, because I was a child, I was 10. I turned 10 on September 18th of 71, and that's when William was my martial arts instructor that year, that fifth grade year. And then I encountered him 10 or 11 years later. So he was initially around 18. I think William has 8 years on me, 7 or 8 years. We're
about 8 years.
Yeah, he's about 8 years older. So he was either a recently discharged Vietnam era Army soldier, and then he was teaching young people in these special access programs how to defend themselves. And then the amazing thing is that 10, 11 years later, it's 1982, 83 time frame, we hear this report of these pterodactyls practically picking the heads off some of our fellows. We didn't know who they were, but we just got a report that, we're on Mars, and it's like, okay, a mile in that direction, we had a team that was attacked by pterodactyls. So we wandered over there with just 2 guns, but 3 guys, in addition to William Stillings being with us. And William was carrying the AR-15s, and when they started to dive bomb us, he just threw me the weapon and said, focus, train your weapon on them at 15 feet and fire like hell at 5. And we were standing there for about a half hour. We had about 20 dead creatures around us just to keep ourselves alive, just to prevent any of the 3 of us from having our heads bitten off. It wasn't gratuitous violence. It was self-defense.
Yes. Another thing that we want to think about here, too, is when you're put in these programs, you're usually, when you leave the military, or they will turn around and grab you within a military, degrade you, and put you in another program. That's the way that the military works. Nothing is as it seems. It never is. If they discover one project name, they'll just change the name, compartmentalize it, and move it somewhere else. So a lot of the ops people that were in these programs were military individuals that just came back from combat situations, like Andrew just said, or they were, shall we say, augmented is the best word. That's what we like to use in the operations field. Augmented to other things. Sometimes you had to take a reduction in rank and pay and everything, so all of a sudden you seemed like you were a nobody. And they just augment you to another program. And they do that with a lot of people out there.
Absolutely. Chris, can you see the adamance by which I addressed Obama's deception? I mean, we were not just on Mars, but in this instance that we're describing, William and I protected the 3 of us from a direct attack by basically about 20 flying dinosaur era-like creatures. So once you've done that, I like to say that, even sitting in a traffic jam on the San Diego freeway is cake, right? Because you're not in these intense situations that we were actually in. So after that, it's nothing to tell the truth and implicate the sitting president as one of our fellows, because he was just somebody else in the program. We weren't big shots just because they knew we were future presidents. But after those kinds of intense experiences with highly trained military people like William, I'm talking about true honorable warriors who protected human life when we were there. And I'm grateful for life for William personally. We are brothers for life, just as Brett and Bernie and I and William are. We were in some very intense experiences together. It wasn't the kind of combat that William and his generation saw in Vietnam, but man, it was intense sometime. So I'm not going to lie about that just because one of our fellow participants was president. So what? When you've had that kind of experience, it's like everything else is cake. It's all cake. I like to say after Mars, everything is cake. Okay, but William and I did have discussions about bringing it forward because he's dedicated to the truth, and he also agrees with me that this generation of American public servant deserves to have their story told. The secrecy has to end, and we have to describe what we and others like us did in these programs.
I completely agree.
The system as it is, it's not working.
There's a lot of websites that are starting to pick up on this idea that the photos that we're getting from Mars are actually faked, and they're taking place on a place called Devon Island, which is a NASA training ground. And it makes me wonder if fakery does exist for the simple fact of covering up the fact that we've colonized Mars, that we have jump rooms, et cetera, et cetera.
And then we probably have a breakaway civilization at this point.
Right, right. Looking at the photos that are circulating, would you two say that these are accurate representations and accurate photos, or are the majority of what we see hoaxes and fakery?
You got a lot of mix going on, from what I can see. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely a mix of real and fake because, for example, NASA image PIA 10214, which is the one that I analyze in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, up on the right side of Tsiolkovsky Ridge, which would be the northern crest line of Tsiolkovsky Ridge, you can see the Martian plesiosaurs that are commonplace there. I'm sure that William had an experience being chased by one or several of them at different times, probably, just as a result of being on the surface as much as he was. Courtney Hunt and I, you may recall, in my second jump period, but was my second acclimation jump of 2. I went up by myself, and then I went up with Courtney just to walk around outside the same jump room. We were actually chased back to the jump room by one of these plesiosaurs. They look like boulders, but then this head and neck come up like the Loch Ness Monster, kind of, and they run at you, and we can outrun them, but they have teeth going all the way back down their throat. They're such vicious predators if they do catch you. So fortunately, we ran fast enough to get back into the jump room. But that image, PIA 10214, shows the Martian plesiosaurs. So there's your proof that some of the photographs from NASA have been real. And to that identification of Martian life forms that no longer exist on Earth, I mean, plesiosaurs were aquatic reptiles on Earth, and they did not survive the KT extinction event that killed the dinosaurs, but they're still on Mars as terrestrial predators. In addition to those types of images of animals, we have images of humanoids. Some of the Homo martis martis and the Homo martis extraterrestrialis have shown up in their images, and also military numbering of our own craft and shelters and so forth on the surface that are in camouflage webbing. Some of those ended up getting photographed, and I think at that point that may be why NASA began faking some of the images on Earth.
Well, also we found what we've been watching also with even the craft that are up there right now on Mars, just the ones from NASA. They're finally getting glimpses of craft. You'll take one picture of something up in the sky, and then another picture, and it's close to the ground, and another picture, it's on the ground. Also up there, when the Russian spacecraft were going out there, their probes and everything, they were destroyed. They weren't just ended function, as did one U.S. aircraft. They were destroyed. So there's a lot more going on, behind the scenes that the average person isn't catching. But Andrew, there's one picture, and I forget the number of it, but they were worried about the rover. The panels of it had become so dusty and everything, and they had no technology to get this dust off. And then the next morning, when the other ones came in, the other viewers came in, these panels were totally clean, like they'd been Windexed.
Yeah, and there was also the testimony from the woman sorry to interrupt, but there was also the testimony of the woman who called into Coast to Coast AM about sitting at a NASA console in 1979, which was only 2 years before I first went up. William, I have to ask you, I never asked you when we were on the surface, when did you first go up? You certainly were in place there with your weaponry by 82, 83. When did you first do your first jump?
Basically, the first time that I'd had anything to do with the jumping and everything was about 5 years before that. Yeah. So there were military guards that were in place to help us when they could, but then there were times when we were on our own and we had to, run like hell, let's say, to get back to a jump room or that sort of thing. As Courtney and I did on my second jump, we were running to save our lives from one of the plesiosaur-like predators on
the surface.
Wrong time.
Wrong place, wrong time. That's the best way to describe it.
I look at it from a security point of view, and that's lessons learned, But what a lesson, huh?
Now, what are they doing on Mars? Is that a breakaway civilization, as you were saying, Andy?
Well, when Laura Eisenhower, the great granddaughter of President Eisenhower, came forward in 2010 and 2011, describing how there was a recruitment effort made in her life in 2006 and 7 to go up with her two then 10-year-old twin boys. She was in an interview with Alfred Lambermont Weber and I, Alfred hosting, in which she said that she had been told she would go up via Ark. And the people who were recruiting her, who were allied with the Aviary, which is kind of a funky intelligence faction, to put it politely, revealed to her that there were space planes, just as Randy Kramer has stated, going from Earth to the Moon to Mars and so forth. So Laura thought that the Arks were potentially arcs to get a lot of humans and animals off of Earth if we had a crisis that would threaten the survival of planet Earth and we needed to decant humans and animals to Mars. But in fact,
Exactly.
Arc was the acronym for the jump room. So Arc means aeronautical repositioning chamber. So if you imagine the fact that my first jump was in July of 1981, and Laura was being invited to join a colony 25 years later to the day, so to speak. Okay, in other words, in 2006, we can infer from that testimony, the synergy between my testimony and Laura's, that they've had the opportunity to get at least 500,000 people up there, just by going every 15 minutes, just one or two person going through the jump room in El Segundo or at the CIA complex near the George Washington Bridge in New York City. I mean, if William and the other Army guys there were there 5 years earlier, that means that corroborates Michael Relf's testimony that he first went up in 1976 for the Army.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're getting corroboration here. And I'm so happy and I'm just thrilled and I feel so honored that such a distinguished member of the United States military as William has come forward as a whistleblower tonight. I have chills because this is what I've been working for in my truth campaign. The people who served in these programs and what we did, that story deserves to be told and it deserves to be honored by the President of the United States. All of these Mars jumpers, whether they were civilian or military, we all had our missions, deserve to be honored by the President. As President, I think I would at least give everybody the Space Medal, maybe the Space Medal of Honor. Okay, because this was distinguished service in one of the most threatening environments that human explorers have ever confronted. I mean, I know every frontier has had its dangers, including the American frontier. But imagine being that many miles from home and some Martian predator is looking at you as if you're lunch. Okay, this was a brave group of Americans, and we should be proud of our service. And it wasn't just Americans. Because as William may recall, you may be able to corroborate this, I don't know, but we crossed paths with a Soviet team.
Sure.
And we interacted in discussions with a British team. Not William and I. He was protecting me during the pterodactyl attack, and I was firing away like hell as well. I'm talking about just generally speaking, when I was on the surface, we crossed paths with British and Soviet Russian teams. So they too served.
Oh, I was just about to ask if it was a joint project with any other countries or if it was strictly the U.S.
A breakaway civilization is this. Its consistency is of all, they're gathering good people together from the special forces to security to science to politics to everything. And that's the key. You have to have a mixture of everybody, especially when you're dealing with individuals who can put things together from the superpowers. That's very important.
And that's what I hope to do as president. I mean, why are we waging a proxy war with potentially our most valuable ally, Russia?
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy making. Russia has been our ally. Russia actually sent ships here during the American Revolution and the Civil War to protect our shipping, which was in danger of being interdicted by the British potentially to sunder our revolution during the Civil War. And then they were also our allies in World War I and II, and we never exchanged hostile military weapons upon either the soil of either country when we could have during the entire Cold War. And we brought about a peace and a transformation of the former Soviet Union into Russia and the constituent states of the former Soviet Union. We should build on that to have an American-Russian partnership that will feed the world. Look at all the acreage we have for agriculture. That will illuminate the northern hemisphere by sharing electricity across the North Pole like Buckminster Fuller conceived of with Russia. So that's one of the major reasons I'm running for president. We were crossing paths with Russian chrononauts on the surface of Mars and waving to them as fellow participants in the secret space program, in the breakaway civilization that was emerging to protect Earth from extraterrestrial threats. We weren't shooting at each other because of Cold War hostilities. So I salute my cosmonaut brothers tonight, not just distinguished Americans like William Whitecrow, but the Russians who were up there. We were in a scary place. There were moments of sheer terror there. So we're going to censor ourselves and not talk about it? We're not going to have this become part of human history? That would be like sequestering the information about European explorers crossing the Atlantic when they were being told that they would sail off the edge of the earth or they would be devoured by sea monsters. Mm-hmm. And they came here, and look what happened in the synergy between the Europe and the New World.
Well said.
We can't keep this information secret any longer. It's our cosmic responsibility to talk about. And I just couldn't be happier that William has come forward tonight.
So thank you. And also, you guys got to remember out here that the systems that are in place right now are not working. Something has to change. And it's in our decisions at this level right now on what we can do in the future. We may not do it this year, but there are years in the future that we can do the research, understand what's really going on, and make the move.
Yeah, why are we spraying chemtrails and making everybody sick with respiratory disease? So I have to sit here with my cranberry juice and hope that I won't cough during a radio broadcast like this, rather than bring about a free energy revolution where we won't be emitting any carbon into the atmosphere. I mean, basically, the permanent secret government listened to Dr. Teller and adopted his plan to spray oxides of aluminum and barium, and now strontium, some people claim, in the troposphere. Yeah. In the upper atmosphere, which is making everybody sick. It's eliminating our blue skies, which is literally part of our humanity, to live in a planet with a beautiful blue sky above you and your whole future ahead of you. And they're putting us under a permanent bank of artificially induced clouds, just to stem global warming when we could do it with a design science revolution on Earth. It's crazy.
Right.
I agree.
Lunatics have taken over the asylum, and so some of the special project people like William and I, we're not censoring ourselves. We're coming forward now and saying, look, this is what this country has actually done, and therefore this is what we can do as a country.
Well, let me ask you this, Andrew. Do you have any insight into any intelligent civilizations on Mars, or maybe ancient civilizations or ancient ruins?
There's both. There's 5 primates there. There's the Homo martis terris, who are our cousins. They're the survivors of the Earthling presence on Mars prior to the solar system catastrophe of 11,500 before current era. They could probably reproduce with us. They're so close to us genetically. They're a little bit different in their physiology, because they had to push a lot of heavy rocks out of the way to dig out of Mars after it was devastated during that event. There's the Homo martis martis, who were the diminutive Martians that were there when we got there during the first civilization on Earth, when the high Egyptian civilization got there. The little diminutive elfin Martians that look like kind of like the vampire in that classic silent film Nosferatu. Count Orlok, played by Max Schrenk, the German actor. They're not 6'6" like he was. They're more like 5 feet tall. But they're the original Martian humanoids, and we have been in liaison with them. It was that type that led Courtney Hunt and I from the jump room that we called the Corkscrew down into their little part of their little civilization underground. They gave us a little tour of what their living conditions are like underground. So there's the diminutive type. There is the Homo Martis Extraterrestrialis, which are a branch of the Gray ETs, who kickstarted our civilization in 3000 BC during ancient Sumer. In other words, 6,500 years after the disaster, we're being bailed out. We're being catalyzed again into a civilization by the small grays. The small gray terrestrial humanoid civilization on Mars is a branch of the large gray species, which has many subspecies. They're one of them, and they're terrestrial on the surface there. They were tending to lurk and sort of follow our moves to see what we were up to, but never attacked us. But I don't think we were in liaison with them. They were sort of silent observers of what we were doing. Then there are some more exotic. There's a kind of a Sasquatch type of primate on Mars. They're smaller. They tend to be smaller than our 4 types of Sasquatch, more than like 6 feet tall rather than 8 feet tall or 9 feet tall. The Homo Martis Sasquatchus, as I've named them. And then there are tiny little diminutive ones that we call Homo Martis de minimis that I'm sorry to say most of us probably stepped on and killed some of them when we were on the surface because they're just tiny. They're like a quarter of an inch high, about the size of a small cricket. And so, I think the American people deserve to know this. And like I said, I couldn't be happier that William has now joined the truth movement, not just as a warrior from the past, as he was when he was helping us explore the truth of what was on Mars, but now has joined the truth movement per se, and will be bringing his experiences forward, I'm sure, much more in a much more detailed way in the future.
Well, I have to admit, if it were anybody but William, I would have a hard time believing it. But because I know William and I know his heart, I completely believe you, William, and you, Andy, as well. Did you know, Andy, that the Army Chief of Staff just last week gave a speech in which he warned his graduates that they would be encountering little green men and hybrid armies? Do you know what that might mean?
No, I don't. I must admit, I would defer to William's judgment on that. I'm not a military man. I'm shadow listed as, I believe, as a lieutenant commander in the Navy, just as a matter of record keeping. But I've never had a command in the Navy, and I've never served in the Navy per se. I've served in the Naval Secret Service in Pegasus, and then a security matter in the mid '80s. But I would defer to William on that question.
Mainly, I would have to say that in everything there's 2 sides. We have, shall we say, the others or visitors, and the way we like to describe them as the others. And some are very okay to be around and to deal with, and others are very vigilant in trying to interfere with the human species and what's going on with it. I think we see a lot of that going on right now. So as from a security point of view and everything, what I think he is saying is, obviously all of us are getting this feeling that something from the sky is coming here, or dimensional, or something like that, interfering, and that's what they're talking about right here. There's been several conflict issues with another species, actually, one in particular, and those are the ones that he's basically talking about right now. Hybrid is on the way. I mean, we're here already. All of us, in a sense, are hybrids. But there is a new generation. And if they're from the side, and I've been feeling this myself, that is more negative, then our governments and everybody better get things together, because we're talking about something that goes far beyond anything we've ever had to deal with before. And knowledge getting out about these entities and these beings and these conflicts we're having, you see them sometimes in NASA, things being shot here and there. All things aren't good. But then again, I was in the security level of things, and I protected people like Andrew and went in on other projects to find things and make sure that they didn't go any further, shall we say. And so, yeah, I understand what he's saying. He's saying getting ready for the other aspects of these beings that aren't as good as some of them are. And they're already here, really.
Now, you mentioned the Greys, Andy. What were they like as far as their personality? Did they have a personality? And did they seem to be separate entities of all unto themselves, or did they all seem to have kind of a hive mind?
Well, I interacted with small grays, and in fact, at the time that I received the briefing, that of the 70 or so species that are known to have visited our planet, the four most frequent, the frequent visitors are the small grays, the tall grays, the amphibians, also called the reptilians, and the Nordics. When that lecture began in 70, 71, when I was in the fourth grade, the lady from Project Pegasus said, and some of you kids have already had contact with this species, and that was the small grays. They would come into my bedroom at night. I would come into the house, and they might be standing over in the corner. Their behavior was always kind of recondite. I remember one time when they showed up at the side of my bed, I willed myself to push the side of one of them, and it kind of folded in like a slipper does. It was kind of flexible. So I don't know if they had a hive mind, but the small grays that I was encountering in childhood, probably as a result of my time travel experiences, maybe as a knock-on effect from my dad's involvement with things like the ramjet and the high-performance jet aircraft that we were designing to respond to the extraterrestrial presence in our skies, was essentially benign. I felt that they were visiting me. They wanted to test me. They were both sort of interacting with me and testing my human factors. And who was I? I was the son of a leading aerospace engineer who was time traveling. So they had like a special interest in me, I think. The other extraterrestrials that I met personally there was that summit that was held in one of the domes underneath Albuquerque, where the two tall grays wanted to meet the children of our project people. And that was kind of the summit. And they were sort of like, actually I had a discussion with Douglas Dwayne Dietrich about this. They were sort of like evolved Han Chinese. He actually cited a specific tall Han Chinese ethnic group that they may be connected to. Their genes may be in that ethnic group on Earth. But they were sort of like maybe contemporary Han Chinese after an additional million years of evolution with larger eyes and hands and about the height of a human being, about 6 feet tall. And they were very intelligent. I remember when we were communicating with them telepathically, and it got so intense that I had to go out in the hallway and get some water from the drinking fountain just to go back in and deal with the intensity of their intelligence. So the tall grays are highly intelligent. Mm-hmm. They were benign. They were guests of our government. But as I left that meeting and I asked my dad about them, he revealed that at that time, which would have been that meeting was around spring of 72, that we had no idea who they were, where they were from, or what they wanted. So that was the real situation inside the secret reaches of government. You know, you have individuals, his name is like Alex Collier, who give you sort of this litany of all the different planets and species that the visitors are coming from. But in fact, from my perspective, as somebody actually inside the government in the early 70s, we had no idea what we were dealing with. We didn't know whether they were hostile, benevolent, or neutral. I think they were probably neutral. Yes. I think there was a finding that they were concerned that we were detonating nuclear weapons, and they were communicating that to contactees. And who was I interacting with at Pegasus? I mean, Harold Agnew, who my father and I were reporting to, was the guy who babysat the atomic trigger when it was flown from Los Alamos to the island of Titian to be put aboard the bomb that was dropped by the Enola Gay on Hiroshima. So they knew who they were dealing with. They were interacting with me and my dad. They were interacting directly with the atomic research community back when we were on Pegasus. And then the third interaction I had with ETs on Earth was some grays came in and looked at the keloid scarring on my chest when I was 18 in summer of 80, before the Mars jump room. But then, of course, there was the one sighting of the Homo Martis extraterrestrialis with Bernard Mendez and William Stillings and I as we came out of the jump room at dusk one night. So it's a mixed bag. I don't speak of the grays, and I'm trying to discourage that use because talking about the grays is like talking about humans who look like us who also are on other planets in the galaxy. There's different subspecies and races and planetary groups and constellations of planets and star systems that are quote-unquote the grays. It's kind of like talking about Latin America as a monolith rather than as a very diverse, multicultural continent.
So they don't necessarily have the same agenda.
No, we're dealing with different subspecies and planetary and stellar groups of the Greys who even have different physiology. Some are tall, some are short, some look more like us, some look more refined in the basic sort of Asiatic beauty of their faces. Some are orange colored with purple splotches. There are different ones that have been cited and that are interacting with us. And so that's why in my proposals, my 100 proposals for president, one of my proposals is to actually publicly develop a sound extraterrestrial contact doctrine, a standing policy that will acknowledge the fact that these extraterrestrial visitors to our planet could be from the spectrum in terms of their threat potential, from highly benevolent through neutral to highly malevolent, potentially. And we can't reach one conclusion. Like, let's say David Jacobs reaches one conclusion in his book, The Threat, that they're hostile. Well, my interactions with them didn't indicate hostility. They were scientists. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't know if you have any insight into this or not, but we received an email about a week and a half ago from a listener that felt that they were getting pretty frequent visits from Greys. They weren't sure about it, but they said they wake up and they have this feeling like they've been visited again, and it's been happening their entire life. And they wrote and asked if we have any way of stopping this, or any amulet or anything they can use. I didn't have an answer for them. Any thoughts on something like that?
Well, I was given a briefing when I was in the 5th grade that the government knew that we had been visited by some extraterrestrial species for thousands of years, and some had actually played a signal role in our evolutionary development, like the small Greys kickstarting civilization in ancient Sumer. That they knew that they had been visiting intensively for several hundred years, with a spike up in visits after the atomic age, with the detonation of atomic weapons, which is crazy on a cosmic level because atomic explosions fragment the physical substrates of the universe. And clearly these advanced civilizations were concerned about that and were not going to tolerate it. Okay. And notice how we did shut that down in the early 90s for the most part. That was a good thing that we did. But that they knew that where I was going with this, that in this briefing, they stated that they knew that the people being visited in a one-off way, in other words, there were certain people in human culture who were contactees. There was a class of contactees. And we didn't know why they were selecting the particular contactees, but one of the resulting traits of the contactees was high creativity.
Yes.
I had some discussions with Dr. Roger Lear, the late great Dr. Roger Lear, about that fact. So they knew that they were either selecting creatives, they were scanning the population to identify creatives, or they were engendering creativity in the contact experience, or maybe both, in order to uplift our civilization and take it to the stellar level, the interplanetary level, the interstellar level, and that those people could expect to be contacted throughout their entire lives. So that's what I was told in 1972. It's a long time ago.
Wow.
So that's kind of the profile, that the contactees have to come to terms with why they're being contacted and what can they do creatively to uplift our civilization so that we become a civilization worthy of the contacts, worthy of not being annihilated by the extraterrestrials, worthy of becoming an interplanetary race. Look at the books that are coming out by people like Alfred, like Dr. Michael Salla. Exopolitics is starting to map where we're going to be going as a civilization, but part of it is personal. So the contactees have to lose the victimization script and start asking themselves, well, now that it's clear that I'm a contactee, how do I let go of the fear and paranoia and take the energy of those contacts and do something creative with it? Because it really is a cosmic privilege to have been brought into that sort of interstellar fellowship. I had a largely positive experience with the ET visitors.
So,
Same here.
So you mentioned Shumar. Of course, I've got to ask you about the Anunnaki. How do they play into this whole thing? Or are the tales of the Anunnaki just tales of the Greys in a different context?
Well, you don't know. In addition, you not only have the Anunnaki and the small gray motifs in the study of ancient Sumer, you have the fishman motif that may have actually some kind of fish-like looking man extraterrestrial may have been the influencer of that development, which gave rise to the ecclesiastical hat that makes the head look like a fish's head and so forth. What I was told was that it was the small grays, that they were the catalyst
Interesting.
of after the high Egyptian civilization that had already reached Mars. I mean, my group found that intaglio of an Egyptian pharaoh on the surface of Mars. So we know beyond the studies done by Hoagland, Barra, and Munch about the pattern of the Sidonia ruins being identical to the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and so forth in Cairo, which means Mars. So we've mapped now but my point here is from both space and from the rovers, identifying Martian artifacts that are Earthian and Egyptian in origin. That first civilization on Earth, that we don't know how many tens or hundreds of thousands of years it existed prior to the catastrophe of 11,500 years ago, reached Mars. Okay, so we were dormant for about 6,500 years, and I was told that it was by the Defense Department of the United States in lecture and in private consultations that it was the small grays that were interacting with me in my childhood environment that had helped kickstart the human civilization in ancient Sumer with mathematics and writing and science and so forth, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, and so forth, to bring a civilization forward again that could become uplifted and return to the stars. And that's the process that we're in.
Now, William, I've got to ask you this, as a shaman, and myself being on the shamanic path as well, there's a lot of Native American ceremonies that put you in contact with other energies out there. Could some of these energies actually be some of these grays that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, we talk about these are our brothers, and as a Hopi talk about the blue star, and when the two come back together, a lot of things are happening. This is all happening now, yes, is the answer to that. When I was sitting around a fire one time and I was talking to one of my elders, I asked him that question. We were looking at the stars, and I just got through. I was their gopher, as we call it, as a young man. And I was getting some wood for the fire, and I came back, and they're all just looking up. And they did things like that to make you ask a question. So I'm looking up to them, and it's like, what are you looking at? And they go, them, and them who? Well, our brothers. And I'm just, and they're just teaching me a lesson right off the top, be expecting things, from the sky, because this is where a lot of things come from, the Great Spirit, all of our gods, everything comes from the sky, and so basically in the long run, they were just telling me that, we are not alone. These are our brothers up here. And there are good ones and there are bad ones. And during our ceremonies and everything, a lot of the things that we do is to try to put ourselves in the state of minds and the time phrase, dimensional phrase. Well, now we're talking on an esoteric basis here now, and it's a dimensional thing where you can recontact. It's kind of like telepathy, like Andrew was talking about. Or a prayer, what I believe prayer is directed telepathy towards a specific thing. You're creating a frequency to talk to a specific thing. And that's the same thing we do in ceremonies and everything else. We are directed will, we refine the energy, and we're directing our needs or our wants or our thanks or whatever it is in that direction. The thing about extraterrestrials is they're so far advanced on us, and I like to call them the others. And the reason they do that, it's easier for them to pick us up. This vocal thing that we're doing right now is a hassle. It takes us 20 minutes to get a thought across, you know what I mean, or an idea across. Yeah. When if we're doing it, just mind to mind, boom, it's instantaneous. within a few seconds, you understand completely what's going on. And that's another aspect of what we deal with when we're working with these beings. Now, I'll have to say, with Andrew and the Graves and everything like that, I agree with him. My experiences are from childhood, even before the programs, actually, Andrew. And then things started happening after that. And it's like the government and everybody knew, oh, they've been contacted, time to do something, so you start being followed, and then you're introduced into things from that point on. Yeah, exactly, Chris, and that's what I believe has happened. I know it's been my experience when I was a young kid. The small ones first come to you and everything, but after a time, when I seen a tall one, I'll give you one experience. I was in a craft, and I know it was. I've told my wife about this many times. And I'm walking down this hallway in a craft, and I look to the right, and I see another little hallway up with a bench. And there's a farmer sitting there, a nurse sitting there, a little girl like for Sunday school, and another teacher sitting there on this thing. They were looking at a wall, and it was a menage of lights on the wall. And I thought, okay, this is cool. And I said, who are these? And I got an answer to my left behind me. These are our helpers. I went, okay, cool. And we continued on down the hallway. But I was talking to a tall gray, very intelligent. It was as if I knew this individual. And then a couple of weeks later, I'm climbing as a young kid, now a very young kid, I'm telling you, up over these rocks, and I look down in the valley, and I see a craft, and I see two small ones and a tall one. All of them, when I seen them, looked at me and simultaneously looked up at me, and then they looked back down as to say, oh, it's only him. Went back what they were doing. It just kind of faded out. About 10 minutes later, dust kind of kicked up, and I knew then that, the craft and them were gone. But we have a connection that can be developed, and they actually want it. You're kind of watching us, though, right now, and we have to make the right moves in order for there to be a contact and a full dialogue going here, so they can tell us more of what's going on.
That's amazing that you would say that, because as a child, I had experience with the short ones to the point, I've said this before, to the point to where my mother actually took me to a psychologist because I kept complaining about these little things coming into my room at night. And then I kind of forgot about it for several years, up until about 21, 22, when I had an experience where I actually saw the tall ones. And I remember this experience very, very, very vividly. But that was the same progression, was the small ones as a child and the tall ones later in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's an analogy here, I think, to the Obama Mars story, and that is that what the commonality between William and I and William Stillings is that the three of us had positive contact with the small grays in childhood, and look what we were given. Look at the cosmic gift we were given. For all the stark terror that occurred occasionally on the surface, we were permitted to go to another planet and do so under conditions of secrecy, certainly of life-threatening danger, but also just have the experience of leaving our planet and stepping on another celestial body and doing things and then coming home to our home planet. So again, we have to let go of the fear and really identify what's going on here in this whole phenomenon. A lot of the ufological works of fiction and fact have been fear-based, and we really have to start to analyze what grounds have there been for fear, because fear should be linked to danger, not...
Very well said, Andy. I don't mean to cut you off, but we are at the end of the hour.
Wow.
Andy2016.com, the website. Of course, WilliamWhitecrow.com, too. That was a great note to leave it on. We've got to remove the fear. That's what we do here at TruthFrequencyRadio.com. Stay tuned. Much more deprogramming coming up for you. I think Frank...